So Washington State, it looks incredible online, but living here is a very different story. People either fall madly in love with Washington or they quietly burn out and they leave. And there's truly not a lot of middle ground. And the reason for this is very simple. Washington State has some of the highest highs and some very real trade-offs that you have to be honest with yourself about before you move. So if you are relocating to Washington or you're even just seriously considering it, this video is going to be for you. And if we haven't met yet, I am Leah Courage. I'm a fifth-generation Washingtonian, and my husband John and I have spent our entire real estate careers helping people buy, sell, and relocate all across the state and the country. And I am not here to sell you on the dream of living here, and I'm also not here just to scare you away. I'm here to walk you through the real pros and cons of living in Washington State based on my actual lived experience, real migration trends, and what we have seen and heard after working with hundreds and hundreds of buyer and seller clients here over the years. And I want you to stay until the very end, because after we go through the pros and the cons, I am going to help you decide whether Washington actually makes sense for you specifically, not just whether it looks good on Instagram, which it absolutely does. Now let's start with the pros, because there are very real reasons why people stay here long term. And the first one is a big one. Number one is no state income tax, for now at least. So Washington is one of only a handful of states in the entire country that does not tax personal income. 0%. Whether you make $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year, the state takes none of your paycheck. And for high earners, business owners, and also for retirees that are pulling income from investments or retirement accounts, this is massive. It can mean tens of thousands of dollars a year staying in your pocket instead of going to the state. So that alone is enough to keep a lot of people here, even when other things get challenging. And yes, there's talk about this changing. And yes, the state absolutely makes up for it by taxing you in other ways, which we'll talk about later. But as of now, this is still a very real and very powerful benefit of living in Washington. The second major pro is that Washington is essentially two states in one, geographically speaking. You don't have to leave the state to completely change your environment. On the west side of the Cascades, you have these beautiful, lush rainforests that feel straight out of Jurassic Park. You have the Olympic Peninsula with moss-covered trees, waterfalls everywhere, and dramatic coastlines. You also have the Puget Sound and the San Juan Islands, where marine wildlife and ferries and water access are just a part of daily life. And then you cross the Cascade Mountains heading east, and the entire world changes. Eastern Washington is dry, sunny, and it's wide open. It's high desert, it's rolling hills and vineyards and dunes and canyons. And people who live here in Washington actually joke around that you can ski in the morning and hike in the afternoon and sit by a lake or the ocean at sunset, all without leaving the state. That level of geographic diversity is incredibly rare in one state. And for people who value variety and incredible outdoor access, it's a huge reason that they stay. Another major pro of living in Washington State here is the quality of the healthcare, especially in and around the Puget Sound region. So Washington is home to some truly excellent hospital systems and research institutions, and also specialty care. And for many people, access to strong healthcare becomes a hugely deciding factor in staying here long term. Between major systems like the University of Washington Medical Center and Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center and Swedish Hospital, Virginia Mason Hospital, and Children's Hospital, along with a huge, deep bench of specialists, people here often have access to treatments and expertise that simply don't exist in smaller or more rural states. And this is especially important for families with complex medical needs or people managing chronic conditions, or the elderly, or anyone who wants peace of mind knowing that ultra high level care is close by. Even outside of Seattle proper, a lot of Western Washington still benefits from relatively strong medical infrastructure compared to a lot of other regions of the country. It's one of those things that you don't fully appreciate until you need it. Another fun pro is that Washington also benefits from cheap and clean energy, and this is something that people actually don't appreciate until they live elsewhere. Because of our massive hydroelectric dams, residential electricity rates here are actually among the lowest in the nation. Most of the grid is powered by water rather than coal or gas, and that means lower bills and less volatility. Another huge pro is that Washington is a serious agricultural and food production powerhouse. And this is not just a foodie state in name. Washington is actually the second largest wine producer in the entire country. It produces the majority of the nation's apples, most of its hops for beer, and enormous amounts of cherries, berries, shellfish, and seafood. Farm to table here isn't just a trend, it's actually just how things work a lot of the time. Farmers markets are abundant across Washington, local food is highly accessible, and freshness is just part of daily life. It's pretty great. So if you care about where your food comes from and you want ultra high quality products, Washington delivers in a massive way. The sixth pro is access to the outdoors that actually is integrated into daily life, not just to vacations here. So in Washington state, nature isn't something that you just plan a once a year trip around. It's actually something that is woven into your normal daily routine. You can go for a hike after work, paddleboard before dinner, or take a ferry ride just because it clears your head. Our beaches and forests and lakes and mountains are all close enough that they actually don't feel like places that you only go on special occasions because they're so far away. And for a lot of people, especially for those coming from really dense urban areas or flat states, this fundamentally changes how they live their lives. You're not escaping to nature on the weekends, you're coexisting with it all week long. And even the cities actually have stunning interurban trails and incredible parks to take advantage of. So if outdoor access is a big part of how someone regulates stress, stays active, or feels grounded, this factor alone about this state is a reason that many people never leave Washington once they arrive. For families, another underrated pro is education flexibility, especially with programs like Running Start. So high school juniors and seniors can attend community college tuition free, often graduating high school with an associate's degree already completed. That can and does save families tens of thousands of dollars in today's incredibly high college costs, and it gives students a huge head start. And next, yes, we need to talk about the coffee, because coffee culture here is not just a personality trait, it's practically a religion. So Starbucks may have started the whole thing here, but the independent roaster and espresso stand culture is on another level in Washington. You can find truly excellent coffee in the smallest rural towns. And trust me, I've tested this because I am an avid and highly snobby coffee drinker. Bad coffee just doesn't tend to survive here. It gets weeded out quickly. Another small but actually meaningful pro is the lack of bugs that we have here, especially west of the Cascade Mountains. So compared to the South or in the Midwest, Washington actually has very few pests. We have minimal mosquitoes, we have no roaches in most areas, no venomous snakes on the west side of the Cascades, and generally there are fewer things trying to bite you, including fewer Lyme-bearing ticks. You can actually sit outside in the summer without being eaten alive, which sounds small until you've lived somewhere that's not the case. I'm looking at you, Alaska. Finally, Washington's strategic location 100% matters. You are in the gateway to the Pacific Rim here, and flights to Asia are shorter from Seattle than from pretty much all other US cities, and Canada is a short drive away, or a ferry ride. And international travel is genuinely accessible from here, and SeaTac Airport offers a huge number of direct flights to cities all over the world. Okay, now let's talk about the cons, because this is where people either nod along because they already know, or they start reconsidering moving here in the first place. The first major con is the regressive tax system. So Washington doesn't have income tax yet, but it heavily taxes consumption. Sales tax is often over 10%. Car registrations can cost hundreds of dollars a year based on vehicle value. The gas taxes here are high. This disproportionately affects lower and middle income residents, and it's one of the biggest criticisms of living here. Another shock for many people here is the highest alcohol tax in the nation is in Washington. If you enjoy cocktails or spirits, prepare for sticker shock. A bottle that looks reasonably priced on the shelf can actually cost dramatically more at the register. It all adds up quickly. Then there's the gray and the smoke. So west of the Cascade Mountains, winter can mean weeks without sunshine. And then in the late summertime, wildfire smoke can blanket the entire state, sometimes forcing everyone indoors during what should be the best weather of the year. You trade vitamin D for clean air in Washington, and some years, unfortunately, you don't get either. Housing affordability is another major issue in Washington state, and it's one that has changed dramatically, let me tell you, in a relatively short period of time. So King County median home prices near $900,000, which already puts homeownership out of reach for a ton of people. But for a lot of others, the ripple effect doesn't stop there. Remote work accelerated housing demand all across the state, and then it pushed prices up in areas that were once considered affordable. Places like Bellingham and Spokane and Wenatchee and even smaller towns saw rapid price appreciation, tighter inventory, and increased competition almost overnight. The result is that a lot of longtime locals who grew up in these communities have found themselves completely priced out of the very places that they've always called home. So housing here isn't just expensive, it's emotionally charged, and it's a major factor in why people ultimately decide whether they can stay long-term in Washington. Next is the infamous Seattle freeze, and while it's most famous in the city, it 100% extends statewide. So social culture in Washington is pretty reserved and sometimes to a fault, and that catches a lot of newcomers off guard. People here in Washington are generally polite and respectful and non-confrontational. They're also slow to let new people in. In rural areas, this can show up as really tight-knit, cliquey communities where families have known each other for generations. And if your grandparents weren't born there, then you're always going to feel a little bit like an outsider. In cities, it looks different, but the result is often the same. People are friendly on the surface, but they're distant beneath that. You'll hear things like, "We should get together sometime," without much follow through. And building real meaningful relationships can take years instead of months. So if you're willing to put in the time and effort, though, deep relationships are absolutely able to form here, but it's important to understand that this is part of the culture and it's very real. And it's a big reason why many people struggle to feel at home in Washington state. Traffic and infrastructure bottlenecks are very real in Washington state, and this is one of those issues that people don't fully realize until they're living here day to day. With water on one side and mountains on the other side, road options are completely limited, and in many cases, there's simply no way to get from point A to point B other than the main interstate. Congestion can pop up in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, or on weekends, especially around major corridors like I-5, Highway 520, and I-90. Add in the fact that much of the region's infrastructure is aging and it's in constant need of maintenance, and you start to see why commuting here can feel unpredictable and exhausting. For many, traffic becomes a daily quality of life consideration rather than an occasional inconvenience, and it's something that you absolutely need to factor in when you're choosing where to live and where to work. Speaking of infrastructure, the ferry system in Washington is absolutely iconic, and for many people, it's one of the most wonderfully romanticized parts about living here. I know it was for me when I lived on Orcas Island. Ferry rides can feel almost cinematic, but the reality is that their system is also fragile. And if you rely on it regularly, it can have a huge impact on your day-to-day life. Many of the boats are aging, staffing shortages have been an ongoing issue, and that combination honestly has led to a lot of delays in boatings and cancellations and lots of schedule changes. So if you live on an island like Bainbridge or Vashon or Whidbey or in the San Juan Islands, the ferry isn't just a novelty. It is your highway to the mainland. If you miss a sailing or if one has canceled, your entire day can unravel really quickly. Doctor appointments, school schedules, work commutes, travel, and childcare plans all become completely dependent on a system that truly isn't always predictable. So for some people, though, the slower pace and the flexibility required for ferry life is actually a huge part of the appeal. But for others, especially people with rigid schedules or people who need to be on the mainland frequently, it can become exhausting and even life-altering. This is one of those factors that you really need to experience honestly before committing to it long term. Another important consideration is how uneven healthcare access can be depending on where you choose to live in Washington state. While the Puget Sound has excellent hospitals and specialty care, access drops off very quickly as soon as you move into rural or remote parts of the state. In some coastal communities and mountain towns and far northeast or central areas in the state, hospitals are smaller, specialty clinics are limited, and certain services simply aren't available locally. It's not uncommon for people in these areas to drive 2 or 3 hours or even across state lines for specialized care or major procedures or even consistent access to certain types of doctors. For many, this may not feel like a big issue at first, but for families or aging parents or anyone managing ongoing medical needs, distance to care can absolutely become a major quality of life factor. Another con is that property crime and visible homelessness are also hugely ongoing challenges in a lot of Western Washington's urban cores, and they 100% impact day-to-day quality of life for a lot of people in this state. So while violent crime rates are generally lower than in many other major metropolitan areas, things like car break-ins and package theft and vandalism and theft from businesses are extremely common, particularly in and around downtown areas. And on top of that, homelessness is highly visible in certain corridors, with encampments appearing next to highways and parks and transit hubs. Public drug use being something that people encounter a lot more frequently than they might expect. For families or commuters or people relocating from regions where this kind of drug visibility is a lot less common, it absolutely can be deeply unsettling and frustrating over time. This isn't the reality everywhere in Washington, and every town is different, but in cities especially, it's an issue that a lot of newcomers don't fully anticipate, and it's one that is important to factor into where and how you choose to live. And finally, there's what people often call the cascade curtain. You have political and cultural differences between the east and west sides of Washington state. Those are very real, and they can be very intense. So on the west side of the mountains, particularly along the I-5 corridor, politics tend to be deeply progressive. And if you drive over the mountains into more rural communities on the east side, the culture often shifts heavy in the conservative direction. And that divide creates a lot of underlying tension, and it shows up in policy debates and elections and local conversations, and even how communities just plain see one another. A lot of people in Eastern Washington feel governed by people that they don't relate to at all in King County, while people on the west side usually don't fully understand or appreciate the priorities or realities of rural life. So for moderates also, or independents, or people with nuanced views, this can feel totally exhausting. And depending on where you live or work, you will probably feel pressure to keep your opinions to yourself so that you avoid conflict. And again, this doesn't mean that you can't find your people here, but it does mean that understanding the political and cultural landscape of any specific area that you're moving to is very important if feeling aligned with your community matters to you. So, okay, how do you decide if you want to live here? Well, if you earn a higher income or you value nature over nightlife and you can tolerate gray skies in the winter and some pretty steep political divides, then Washington can be absolutely incredible. But if sunshine and affordability and social vibrancy are absolutely essential to your happiness, then this place can 100% be a struggle. Washington is not easy, far from it. But for the right person, the magic of this incredible state makes life here well worth it. So if you're considering relocating and you want to talk through whether Washington makes sense for you, our contact information is below. Go ahead and click on the link in the description. Reach out to us. Let's have an honest conversation before you make a move. And if this video helped you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what surprised you the most. So thank you so much for watching. Keep exploring, and we will see you in the next video.